Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. Okay, first off, even though February is the shortest month, it felt as though it took forever to go through. Probably because of Snowmageddon, having an entire week off and being trapped in the house. So as usual, let's go over some reading stats for February. This month I read 10 books, and between those I read 3,669 pages. My average rating was 3.7 stars. Unfortunately, I had 2 DNFs, and my genre breakdown included 4 romance, 3 fantasy, 2 mystery, and 1 nonfiction. This month I thought I'd do my breakdown based on genre, so since romance was what I read the most of this month, let's go with those first. 3 of those I actually already reviewed for my 5x5 of the month, which was Enemies to Lovers, and I'll put a link to that in the cards right here. You can go check that out. But I will give you a quick rundown of each book. I gave Conventionally Yours by Annabeth Albert 4.5 stars. I gave Beach Read by Emily Henry 4.5 stars, and then I gave Loathe at First Sight by Suzanne Park 3.5 stars. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, 2 of the other books for that 5x5 were actually my DNFs for the month. The last romance book that I read for this month that wasn't a part of that video was also Enemies to Lovers. Ironically, that was not planned, but it was Undercover Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. This is the second book in the Bromance book club series. I read this for the Sugar and Spice book club, which is hosted by Kirsten from Kirsten's Corner and Amanda from Ginger Snapped Reads. I'll put a link to all that stuff down below if you want to join. This story is following Liv, who is Thea from the first book's sister, as well as Mac, who was, I believe, the originator of the Bromance book club, as they fall in love. But that's not all. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the book, Liv finds out that her super crazy hardcore chef boss is also a predator, and when she threatens to out him, he ends up promising to make her regret it. Liv is then determined to bring her boss down, and Mac attempts to help because Mac is nothing if not a hero. However, that is not what Liv wants. She does not want a Prince Charming, she wants a equal. Because of them butting heads over that, there was a fantastic banter and sassy quips and sarcasm, and I just loved it. These two were arguing up until their first kiss, and even after, and honestly, that's what I want in an Enemies to Lovers. But with that, the side plot of Liv trying to bring down her boss was unfortunately overshadowing the romance at times. I really could have done without it at some points, and I wish we would have actually had excerpts from a romance book that the Bromance book club was reading. Lyssa K. Adams did that in the first book, however, we didn't really have that in this one, and I actually missed it. But I still really enjoyed this. It was hilarious. I was laughing all the way through. I ended up giving it 4 stars. So next up for the month, I read 3 fantasy books, and for those, I read the second book in the Shadow and Bone series, which is Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. I read this as a part of the Grishaverse read-along. I will put all that stuff down below. It's still going on if you're interested in joining us for the Six of Crows duology. Honestly, the first book was fine. This one was just kind of painful. This suffered from middle book syndrome, very much so. The main focus of the plot I was still intrigued by, but the pacing in this was really weird. There was a bunch of action at the beginning and a bunch at the end, so that it felt as though the middle was just really dragging. It felt as though we were only focusing on the romance aspect. We are also introduced to a new character, Nikolai, and honestly, I think that man carried this entire book. He was the only character I was truly invested in. I was so tired of going back and forth between Elena brooding, saying something mean, Mal brooding, saying something mean, and then that on repeat for 200 pages. I honestly thought the action at the end of this would reinvigorate me, but wasn't really interested anymore, and I kind of skimmed through the last 50 pages because of it. The romance really just killed this series for me, if I'm being completely honest. I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. After that one, as well for the Grishaverse read-along, I read the last book, which was Ruin and Rising, and this was actually my favorite of the series, thankfully. This was pretty fast-paced overall. It was very much action-based. There was an adventure storyline going on, and in the end, I think I just loved this one because there were more characters than just Alina and Mal. Once again, I was annoyed by the romance aspect all the way through this, and unfortunately, although I was having a good time for most of the story, the ending just left a bad taste in my mouth. It seemed a little too easy, a little too simple. That was a bit of a letdown for me. I ended up going with 3.5 stars because, as I said, this was my favorite of the series. The final fantasy book I read this month was Among the Beasts and Briars by Ashley Poston. This was actually for my personal book club read, and while it was sold to me as like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, I think this was so much more, and I really enjoyed it. This is following Saris, who lives in a magical kingdom where only royalty has powers, but she also does after experiencing something terrifying when she was a child in the woods that surround their kingdom. Long ago, there was some kind of a treaty between the king of the kingdom and the lady of the woods so that no one from the kingdom will explore into the woods and no one from the woods will go into the kingdom. However, the king has recently passed away and Karis's best friend is up for the crown now. But on the day of her coronation, something goes terribly wrong, and Karis is the only person not affected by it. On top of that, there's this Fox character that follows Karis around all of the time and acts as her little sidekick. I loved Fox. That's all I can say there. Like I mentioned, this was sold to me as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but I think it is so much more than that. You can kind of see ties to Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Cinderella, and I loved all of it. It truly just reads like a fairy tale, and it's so fun. Karis wasn't my absolute favorite because I've mentioned before I don't really like damsel in distress characters, and while she does have some powerful abilities, I think she still kind of towed that line a bit too much for me. Not to say I didn't still enjoy following her. The magic in this world was really cool, and I think Ashley Poston did something interesting by not really explaining much of the magic system to us because Karis didn't really understand it, so it made sense that we didn't really understand it because most of the time we were reading from Karis's perspective. The twists were a bit predictable for me. I think I called pretty much every one of them, but not to say that I didn't still love the ride and following these characters. There was a bit of a time shift right at the end, and I wish we would have had a bit more explanation there for what happened. In the end, I gave this 4 stars. Very much enjoyed this. Honestly, if you like the Lunar Chronicles, I think this is a great book for you to pick up. So next up, I read The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This was the pick for the Page Turners book club, and while everybody else ended up DNFing it, I continued through. Well, it took me a good bit to get invested into the story because there are a ton of characters in this, and we know I don't like following a lot of perspectives. By the end, I was completely engrossed and I could not stop listening to the audiobook. I just love that this was a spin on a Sherlock Holmes story, but our main character is more of the Watson. Not to mention, I adore a mystery where the entire time I'm going back and forth asking, is it paranormal? Is it not? Are there reasonable explanations for everything? Or is there something otherworldly happening here? Fantastic. The setting's really unique, but I do think Stuart Turton kind of bogged down the story with some unnecessary details here and there. I mean, this is a chunky book, so it probably could have done with some cutting. I am proud to say that I was actually suspicious of the ending culprit. I didn't expect the ending reveal that we got. I do think there was a hair of a need to suspend my disbelief, but I love that scene in mysteries where they go through and explain how everything was done, and this did that, so loved it. As I mentioned, there were tons of characters, but that also meant tons of suspects, so this really did need that time to go through and explore all of the different varieties of avenues this could have gone into. Be aware, you go through a lot of red herrings. In the end, I ended up giving this 4 stars. As I said, a bit of a slog in like the first 150 pages, but once you got past that, the mystery really pulled me in. My next mystery was unfortunately a disappointment, and that was The Cousins by Karen and McManus. I actually did this as a buddy read with Lana from Lana X Libris and Kim from Kimberly Reads. I'll link both those ladies down below. Go check them out. I love Karen and McManus's mysteries, and one of the biggest things for me is usually her characters, but unfortunately, I did not care about any of the characters in the story at all. I thought they were pretty flat. I do think she still did a good job of developing the mystery. There were some twists here and there that I did guess, but the end reveal did catch me off guard, but it still made sense for what was happening within the story. The pacing was also a bit odd. We switched between the perspectives of the 3 cousins as well as a past perspective of one of the cousins' mothers. It would just be like weird time jumps between each chapter. Sometimes it'd be hours, sometimes it'd be weeks, obviously ignoring the time jump when it was the mother. That was like a good 20 years previous. That made sense there. I did have a hard time deciding on a rating because I had such high expectations going into this, so I didn't want that drop to be the reason I gave this a low score. In the end, I think I'm gonna go with like 3 stars. It still was a good mystery. I just think I've read better from her. Finally, my nonfiction book for the month was Little Shoes by Pamela Everett. This is a true crime story in which Pamela Everett discovers that her aunts were actually murdered when they were children, and she starts to try and investigate the story to find out more about her family. I really enjoyed the personal anecdotes Pamela Everett put in between the facts she was learning about, particularly at the beginning of the book. I thought it was very interesting how she would tie in things she was learning about her family's past with her experiences she had with some of these people, such as her grandmother, her dad, her uncle, but the rest of the story was much more factual based. I wasn't the biggest fan of how it was written just because it felt a little too stiff, but this was a really powerful and just sad story to read, and I think I loved the fact that Pamela Everett had this one line describing her experience in this, which was, even in the darkest histories, there can be joy to discover. I did appreciate the layout of the story and how it was developed, and even once we were told who was blamed for the crime, she still included little bits of facts and possibilities that might have led to his innocence, but we are unsure about that. I think you can actually see in the writing that Everett is trying to decide whether she thinks the ending culprit was guilty or not, and I just think that allowed us to connect with her a lot more and the story. In the end, this was a very interesting read. It just wasn't one of my favorite nonfictions. I gave it 3.5 stars. All right, y'all, so that is it. It is officially March, and that is so weird. Okay, as always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to tell me in the comments down below what was your favorite book for the month. Let's talk about it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Bye!